situation where the young man was just resisting, and the police officer told him, "Look, you got to be quiet. You have to sit down. You have to stop. Stop moving. Stop moving." The only problem is in this incident is that we have video evidence. We have to make sure that we pay attention to what history is trying to teach us here, and that we don't fall victim, because guess what? After the protest, after this incident is over, then what? That's always the question that I have. After this is over, then what? A lot of the larger schools, and I'm going to go back and forth here in between what my discussion is, but a lot of the larger schools, the Big Tens, the SECs, the Pac-12, they're looking at this upcoming football season for college as $1 billion industry. That's what someone alluded to earlier sometime last month, that this is $1 billion industry, and that there is no way on God's green earth that they will allow this time to really affect the industry. But let's take a look at who actually makes up the majority of the players that are actually playing for the Big Tens, the SECs, and the Big Five power conferences. The majority of those players, the majority of those athletes, not just football, but also all across the landscape of sports. The majority of the athletes happen to be African Americans. But yet and still, you have thousands upon thousands of people rooting, cheering for their favorite team to be successful. Yes, our team won. Oh, wow, our team lost. What do we need to do to make our team better? But yet and still, after those players take off the uniform, they go in and they try to get going. And as a matter of fact, hold on, because this is one of my callers calling to try to get in. So hold on just 1 minute. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike, I'm trying to figure out, are we still doing this?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I'm on live and just want to find out if you have the proper link.
No, I never sent a link. I tried to use the one that, and it just asked me to register, but I never got.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. Let me go ahead and resend that information to you now, so you can go ahead and come on in. All right.
Okay.
So I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you now, so you can come on in.
Just for a heads up, I can only do until about 5 minutes before.
Okay, that'll work.
Okay.
All right, thanks. And as a matter of fact, that's one of my guest panelists that will be coming on board. And I want to make sure, so please excuse me for a minute as I make sure that I get this information sent back out to him, because without the proper credentials, then he will not be able to get on board. So I want to make sure that I send this over to him, and then once he has it, then he'll be able to get back on, and we'll be able to discuss or finish the conversation. Because out here, guys, we have to make sure that we stay on top, we stay on board of what's going on. Because guess what? This will not change unless we stand up. My father and I, we have slightly differing opinions in regards to protesting and everything that's going on. He grew up in the 60s. He was a part of the 60s. As a matter of fact, he was one of the individuals that actually started a riot on Jackson State University, at the time Jackson State College campus, when we did not have the plaza that was wide open. And as most of you people out there who have gone to Jackson State, you're familiar with the plaza. During the 60s, or in the 50s, that area was wide open, and you had traffic that was able to drive straight through the campus. 1963, if I'm not mistaken, a young lady was hit by the name of Mamie Ballard. And my father, along with another young man at the time by the name of Lem Barney, they actually stopped traffic from flowing through the middle of that campus and said because of what happened to her, no one else will travel through the campus. They started that protest because of what happened to her, and that was in the 60s. Fortunately, she was not killed. Here we are, 2020. How many years is that? I'm 55. So 57 years later, we are still having these same type of discussions. Now, as I was saying earlier, when the football players take off their uniform and they go back to their dorms and they are regular individuals, they will, guess what, be treated just like a regular African American. And what I mean by that is that they will have no privileges because it was said by, and I'm not calling his name out on this show, by a professional athlete uh, some time ago, is that he was playing for one of the more prominent NFL teams. And while he was on the field, everyone was cheering, high fiving, having a great time. Wonderful. Oh my gosh, we just won the game. Absolutely excellent. But when he went out to a restaurant, he was told, remember your place. Now, let me clear what I'm saying here. Am I saying that every one of my Caucasian brothers and sisters are like that? By no means. By no means. But because of the few that are out there that are really damaging the reputation of our good sisters and brothers, this is what we have to live with. And then we have someone that's currently in the White House that's promoting this. And because African Americans did not get out to vote, this is what we have to live with, prayerfully until November, and prayerfully until January when the new president is sworn in. But if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. And with that being said, we all must make sure that we get out to vote. Because as I've told a lot of people, if you don't vote, and if you decide, well, my vote won't count, look at each state and what was actually affected and how your vote actually affected the outcome of each one of those races. And as a matter of fact, I was sent some information, and hopefully I'll be able to pick it up, or I'll be able to find um, what our vote and how our vote mattered, or should I say how it did not matter, because we didn't vote. And because we did not vote, we have what we have in the White House. And of course, since I'm online and since I'm having this discussion with everyone today, I won't be able to find it. But because of our vote, and because we did not vote, we have had to tolerate the hatred, the bigotry, and racism that we've encountered so far. And it has been escalated because of the person that's been in the White House. Now, yes, I know I'm here to talk about HBCU sports. And HBCU sports is the main topic of conversation. But when we look at the landscape of the number of African Americans that make up sports today, that this is something that we must be aware of, and we must make sure that we must make sure that is available. So, so these are things that we have to consider, and that we must make sure is at the top of the heap here. Now, as a matter of fact, I have on board now Mr. Cavill, Dr. Cavill, and let's see if I can get him online here so we can start speaking. Dr. Cavill, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So hopefully out there in television land, on the internet, that you guys can hear him as well. Let's say again, can you hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Absolutely awesome. So one of the things that we're talking about here, Dr. Cavill, is even though we do understand that HBCU sports is the main topic of conversation here today, but the one thing that I led off with was the incident that actually took place last week with the police officer on the neck of an African American, which resulted into his death. And even though we're here talking about HBCU sports, we can't help but think about the percentage of students, the percentage of African Americans that make up the landscape of not only college football, but also make up the landscape of professional football and just sports in general. Would you care to give your thoughts on what has actually taken place over the last couple of days?
Certainly, I can address that from that perspective. Um, First, I would be remiss if I didn't give condolence to the Floyd family as we talk about George Floyd. So that's the first thing that I want to do. In being in Houston and a professor at Texas Southern University, people may or may not realize that he was actually from Houston. I'm sure now they have realized that, but he was actually from the area in Houston that we refer to as Third Ward, which also encompasses Texas Southern University. And to bring this closer to home in a lot of ways, he actually was from CUNY Home, which is literally adjacent across the street on Cleanburn Street. 3100 is the listed address for Texas Southern University. He literally lived on the other side of Cleburne in the CUNY Homes project. So for a lot of people around here, it's extensively hard. It's impacted a lot of people, and because of colleagues and friends that I know that knew him, that worked with him, and I heard additional stories in regards to that, it has impacted me. And obviously, as an African American, a black man, in this case, a black man with, as we label it in the academic arena, with privilege, because I happen to be gainfully employed at this time, quote unquote, as they say in a lot of ways, educated, based on the fact that I happen to have earned a doctorate and all the degrees previous that you must acquire for the most part to earn that doctorate title. I do want to make sure that I let people know that I do speak from that position of privilege. And so, with that said, for me, it has been emotional over the last week. It has been sociologically painful, exacerbating are some terms that I would use in describing it in terms of my feelings. And I'm blessed, unlike Mr. George Floyd, that I have the ability to still have these feelings because this brother no longer has the ability to have that in a physical form, obviously. I say all this again to put this in context. What this So I've gone back in an emotional tussle with a young 5-year-old son and trying to put him in the best position to allow him to be able to enjoy life, also learn and succeed in his wildest dreams. That this becomes tiresome, and then I really start to think and had a weekend to do some more self-evaluation and self-healing. That in that context, it created an environment that I thought about those before me that endured much more. So in that framework, if you allow me to use this greater Africana type diaspora,
Yes, sir.
black people, specifically in the United States, is allow me to understand that the struggle must continue.
Now, could you
So,
also, Dr. Cavill, could you
go ahead.
also give your credentials as you continue?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, for those that are interested in that, I'm an undergraduate from Prairie View A&M University, Houston, the first HBCU public institution established in Texas. It's actually the second oldest institution in the state of Texas. Has recently been designated by the legislature as the institution of the first class. I earned my BS in mechanical engineering, as Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. I worked in the field of engineering for about 10 years as an engineer, project manager, transitioned over, decided to go back to school, studied curriculum instruction, and before I left, I started master classes, came back about 10 years later and finished that degree, which was a Master's of Education in Curriculum Instruction with the emphasis on applied mathematics, scientific computation. After that, I moved outside of the engineering realm and decided to go back to school to earn a doctorate. So as I was doing that, I did schooling at a charter school, and also started working on Master of Science in Human Performance. We call it kinesiology now.
Yes.
At the same time that I was working on my doctorate in the MBA, Masters of Business Administration. I completed my doctorate in Education Administration, Supervision, and am currently a full professor at Texas Southern University in the capacity of chair of the Academic University Council, previous chair of the Faculty Senate, as well as a professor teaching in the realm of sports studies and sports managers, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, where we offer a BS in sport management and Masters of Science in sports studies and sports leadership. And just recently, I was awarded a joint faculty appointment not only in the College of Education in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, and Sports Studies. I'm also in the School of Communication in the Department of Radio, Television, and Film in the program of Entertainment and Industry Management with that.
Congratulations.
Yes. So that's a little bit about my academic background for that capacity. But that's where my context in life in a lot of ways. You know, originally born in Norman, Oklahoma, reared in Waco, Texas, with family where we trace go back. And I've always looked at the history of HBCUs. My great-great-uncle, B.L.O.C.K, played at Wiley College in 1925. And so I found that history and started researching HBCUs. So that's the research that I do is in regards to leadership, administration side of HBCUs, as well as just sports in a contemporary framework. So I bring all that into discussion. As I was saying, it weighed extremely heavy on me. And essentially, what I came up after this weekend and watching some of the television, reading more than anything, and listening to those that also studied in this area. Of course, like many people, reading on um, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and talking to colleagues and friends, including my wife, in regards to how do I move forward.
Yes.
So, in doing that, a lot of the context I bring to the table with this discussion is the fact that I have decided in my own framework that I no longer will be silenced or be silenced because of my privilege of all those things I just told you about. Sometimes we can get too comfortable,
Yes.
or tacit in this capitalistic society because of our positions, our desire to continue to grow, believing that we're going to be able to provide financial and therefore maybe some safety measures for our family members, which obviously is needed and commendable. But what you find out through these lived experiences that that's not enough. And the silence is complicit in terms of what we see and what a lot of people have grouped as white supremacy, cloaked in this systemic framing of what many see as a militarized police force that is
Correct.
embedded with individual white supremacists that are doing the things repeatedly that in this last occasion we see directly that led to the death in many people's, and including mine, the murder of Mr. Floyd in that capacity.
And see, the reason why I wanted to make sure that this particular topic was brought up is specifically because of sports. And as I alluded to earlier, the majority of athletes that's involved in college athletics today are made up by African Americans. And we had this young man by the name of Colin Kaepernick. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Cavill. 3 years ago, uh, that he took a stand and said because of an incident that took place then, he took a stand, and because he took a stand, our other brothers and sisters that only make up a small percentage of what I would call anti-abolitionists, they are the ones that voices are being overwhelmingly heard and overwhelmingly being used by the NFL and other entities to say, well, guess what? Because of individuals that are speaking out, we can't let this man on our team because the crowd may not come to watch the games. And because of that, he's been blackballed. Whereas you have other athletes, African Americans and Caucasians, that have committed other crimes. And I could spend a couple of minutes listing those crimes. But because he stood out, and because he stood up, and because he said, well, in this case, he took a knee. And because he took a knee for what he believed in, they essentially blackballed him. Now, with all of that being said, and just like you just spoke, Dr. Cavill, I have sat passively by and just watched this take place. But it comes a time where enough is enough. And I guess my question to you, and trust me when I say, and please don't take it as me trying to put you on the spot, and trust me, I'm not. But my question to you, when you're saying you don't want to stand idly by, I would like to take this platform that I have and say what we can do in terms of getting out to vote. We must get out to vote. We must express ourselves in that way. We have other individuals that have said we must get out and protest. We have to protest. But in the protesting, rioting and looting is not the answer. We must make sure that when we get out, when we protest, that we also engage with our Congress people. Everyone, whether it's local, state, or federal, we must make sure that we engage them to be a part of the solution. We don't want to be seen as a part of the problem, but we want to make sure that we go directly to them to make sure we express our concerns, to engage them, to make sure that bills are passed that must be adhered to. What are your thoughts, Dr. Cabell, on
Certainly,
that?
Michael, and I thank you for the opportunity to respond to that, and certainly don't believe that you have put me on the spot. That's why I decided to join this opportunity. I figured some of those discussions would come up, and certainly, as I told you, I've taken more time over the weekend to really think about my position on this. And so, as I said earlier, for me, it's no longer about being silent, which, as I put it, is being complicit. So, yes, I do believe in voting. I am one that exercises my right to vote. I think that is one component of this. But I do, I think it is one thing that we need to be careful of telling others the way that they should deal with this in terms of how they move forward. And I think words are so important, so I think we need to be careful of using riot, which is one way to explain those that are displeasure, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Spoke about, that riot is the action, I'm paraphrasing here, of the unheard, meaning that when I talked about being silence is the fact that I didn't do my part in terms of speaking up for these folks that have not been heard.
That's
and my
right.
privilege in terms of where I stand in this country financially is of all those different things that we first talked about in terms of one of the reasons that people may listen to me is that fact that I come from a position of privilege. And in that privilege, one of the ways that I use that privilege is to vote because I see the importance of it. But that is because I position myself in a place where I have a voice and that I understand how to exercise that voice. But it's very important for us to contextually understand that there's a lot of people in this country that happen to be African American in regards to that, and other people that are poor and other minorities that have been disenfranchised.
That's right.
And it's extremely difficult to tell people that are literally trying to figure out how they're going to put food on their plate, how are they going to move outside of the environments which are heavily policed, that one of the things they need to do is to vote. We have seen what I refer to as rebellions in this country for a long time, since literally when this country was founded. Many people historically learn about the
Boston Tea Party.
event that took place, right?
Yes.
Which we talk about the Boston Tea Party. That was in all definitions a riot, a rebellion,
Yes.
being oppressed.
Yes.
So it's often in the context of how you look at it. In this country, in terms of one part of it, would not be the United States of America if that event did take place.
Had it not
then you
been
go
for that.
further to look at people that were enslaved as Africans that were brought over. One of the reasons that we are no longer in that same position is the fact that they always rebel. They always look to say that we will no longer be enslaved in whatever capacity. And so in a lot of ways that continues on this day. So I think it's extremely important that we are careful with the words that we choose, that we're very careful with all the mass media that takes on us, and we hear these terms that are put out there, and we're worried, and we are careful about our position of privilege
Yes.
that allows us to be in more of a participant in this contract. If you think about the Constitution in that manner. And for a lot of people in this country, to be frank about it, that contract has been broken.
Yes, it
So if the
has.
contract is broken, it's hard to ask people to uh, remain in this contract, which was one of the ways that we use in terms of voting, is to carry on that. And in the end, let me close this component out with saying that I'm not saying that voting is not important. Obviously, we see voting is very important, but we need to understand that when you're engaging in this process to change America to live up to what we understand is it's a dream, if we want to constitutionally look at it in that way, is the fact that we need to understand that there's multiple levels that we're going to have to engage in this struggle.
Yes.
And for us that can and understand it educationally, that needs to be voting. That needs to be empowering ourselves. That needs to be running for positions and stuff like that. But we also need to be careful not to engage those that are out there protesting.
Yes.
And now that we have learned that there are counter efforts, some of them from the federal government, some of them for the police force, state and sanctioned policies that had put people in this very position to antagonize those that are looking just to do this peaceful
That's right.
protest.
That's
So
right.
we found out in a lot of this that while we are asking folks not to do that, there are people out there, and this is a historic framework. We've known this in the 60s.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
a lot of people were done that. They got into the SNCC, that they got into the civil rights movement, that got involved with the Nation of Islam,
Yes.
that got into the Black Panthers,
Yes.
that were informants, for lack of better words, that destroyed the struggle in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So those things that we've learned from a high tactical process of the CIA and other federal governments in which they have done in the world across the country is not nothing that they're not able to do now.
Right.
So I think we need to be extremely careful about how we frame all this communications and really take some time to think about what we put out there in the public sphere.
And again,
Thank you for giving me that space to deliver that.
oh, no problem. And again, my name is Michael Jefferson, and you're listening to B.L.O.K. Sports. And B.L.O.K. Sports stands for Black Love of Cultural Knowledge. And that's what we're here today to discuss. We're actually here to discuss HBCU sports. But because of the environment in which we're currently living through today, I decided to take a moment just to have a conversation about what took place with George Floyd and the police officer, with him having his knee on his neck for over 9 minutes, and how many African Americans make up the athletes that take place, that participate in sports all across the athletic spectrum. And on the line, I have that you just heard from Dr. Cavill, who is a professor at Texas Southern University. Also on the call, I have Mr. Lute Williams, and I would like to hear from him. I see he's currently muted right now, but I would like to hear from Mr. Williams. So, Mr. Williams, thank you very much for being able to join us here on B.L.O.K. Sports, which is being shown through YourStreet.tv. And as you can see, the main discussion that we've been talking about, even though the show was supposed to talk about HBCU sports, how we're looking to move forward in September, because this is a billion-dollar industry. But because of the number of athletes, the number of African Americans that make the athletic spectrum, we have to address what took place. And before you get into your take and how you feel, can you also give your credentials in terms of the athletic, your landscape, and what you've been doing, and how long, and as a matter of fact, how long you've been involved in sports, And then please continue to go on with your feelings and how you feel about what has taken place. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm Lute Williams. I'm the publisher and editor of the Black College Sports page. Owner of my company is Aziz Communications LLC. We've been publishing the Black College Sports page for 26 years now, going back to 1994. Actually started the year that Steve McNair was a senior at Alcorn State.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to ride his coattails for that first year as he was making headlines every week from really from before the season, but all through the season, all the way up to the NFL draft, finishing third in the Heisman Trophy as well as third was the third pick in the NFL draft of 1995.
Yes, he was.
So what I've been doing for the last 26 years, I started in 1994, in the summer of 1994, and I've been a writer, not just sports, but sports as well as news. I had a news service that I provided news and sports stories to African American newspapers around the country, and I would do a story at a time. And I had the great idea one time riding up the road at 4 o'clock in the morning to instead of doing a story at a time, to do a full page. And in 1994, I sent it out to about 100 African-American newspapers around the country. One week, and I got about 34 subscribers. I sent it out the next week to another 100 and got another 25 subscribers. So I started in 1994 with 58 subscribers of African-American newspapers all around the country. But what I wanted to do was, I'm originally from Danville, Virginia, which is right on the Virginia-North Carolina border. I grew up, my father was a graduate from Howard University, and my mother was a graduate of St. Augustine's University. My sister went to Howard. My family has a long tradition at Howard.
Awesome.
I've been around
HBCU tradition. Yes.
Right. I've been around Black College sports all my days. I started going to the CIAA basketball tournament in 1963 at the age of 9, and I went to CIAA tournaments every year until I went to Howard University in 1972 when they had gone to the MEAC. So I started going to the MEAC tournaments for several years. When I finished college, I started going back to basically all of the tournaments, but I didn't cover just basketball. I covered all sports 52 weeks out of the year, and I syndicated that full page of Black College sports information to African-American newspapers around the country. And I felt that black colleges were getting the short shrift. Everybody was covering all of the major stories, the major NFL, Major League Baseball, but
that's right.
Nobody was really giving these kids the kind of coverage that they deserved while they were in college before they got to the NFL or Major League Baseball or the NBA. So I thought it was a niche, and I started in 94, and I've been going for 26 years. We've probably been in around 96 African-American newspapers around the country, but as newspapers are struggling now because everything's going online, we're down to less than 10 African-American newspapers that are subscribing to our service now. So, that's kind of been my story for the last 26 years. And obviously, when you're having this discussion, as you are, about HBCU sports, there's no way to do that these days without talking about the reality. In fact, I just got a video from a friend of mine from Atlanta who showed me the marches that took place this weekend in about 10 large cities.
Yes, yes.
New York, Los Angeles, Denver, Colorado, practically all over the country. And it's amazing that one act of brutality and torture and killing and murder in Minnesota could create this kind of response. It's very heartening for me. I can tell you that I'm a Muslim by my belief system. I'm an ardent lover of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. I grew up my father was an NAACP attorney who was defending demonstrators in my hometown of Danville, Virginia, when I grew up. He got a Golden Briefcase Award from the NAACP, mother and father are lifetime members. So I've been around the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. In fact, at 15 years old, I was in the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
And in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and in my hometown. So, this ongoing struggle that's been going on for years is not new. The Black Panther Party's original title was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And I was in this organization at 15 years old. And
wow.
Much to my mother and father's chagrin,
Yeah.
they thought,
I understand.
they said, you want to fight the cops, they have more guns than you do. And he was right.
Yes.
But, what this reality brings up in terms of what happened to our brother George Floyd up in Minneapolis is the fact that we're powerless. We saw somebody commit murder in front of our eyes, and we couldn't do anything about it.
Yes.
In my religion,
yes,
we have a saying from our prophet. His name is Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, that lived 1,400 years ago. He says, if you see something wrong being done, change it with your hands. If you cannot change it with your hands, speak out against it. If you cannot speak out against it, hate it in your heart, and that's the weakest form of faith. So, fortunately, there were people there that were speaking out against it. They didn't take the action of stopping it with their hands because they would have probably been killed in addition to for Mr. Floyd. But the reality is that they can't expect people to sit by and allow torture and murder. We've already come through lynchings and every other kind of brutality, rape, and everything else without being able to do anything about it in many cases. Mm-hmm. And really, that's where the Black Panthers, it's not just the Black Panthers, many African-American organizations, the impetus was to do something, to do nothing was not an option. So, I think this is a interesting time, certainly for America, for a guy like me who's 65 years old, mm-hmm. and I'm not old by any stretch of imagination compared to some of our older relatives and friends, but it's heartening to see so many people, both black and white, that are speaking out against this. And I know he's talking about HBCU sports. I don't know if you saw the story that North Carolina Central University head basketball coach Lavelle Moulton was quoted on the front page of ESPN. I think he actually got in USA Today and others. He was saying that the idea that these Power 5 coaches that create generational wealth off of the backs of black people have not said anything about this.
No.
And shortly after that, what's his name in Alabama? Nick Saban. Sick Nabin.
Yeah.
Nick Saban. Anyway,
yeah. Nick Saban.
He came out with a little pitiful statement, and some of the others who know that they make these $10 and $20
millions and millions and millions of dollars.
As Lavelle Moulton said, these people are creating generational wealth off the backs of young black people.
Now let me ask
folks just like.
Now let me ask both of you a question based upon that comment, and I know Dr. Cavell also alluded to that as well. And since you're still on the mic, Mr. Williams, I'll go to you first, and then right after that, Dr. Cavell. What do you think would happen? Now, all of the athletes that are involved in college sports, they have scholarships. But what do you think would happen? And of course, you have some walk-ons as well. But for the scholarship athletes that are African American, if all of the college athletes in those Power 5 schools decided, you know what, enough is enough, you have made enough money off of us, and it's time that we receive some type of income. Now, of course, the NCAA has said, yes, it's about time that you make 50 cents, 75 cents because of Michigan and Michigan State, Ohio State, UCLA, Alabama, LSU. They have made so much money off of your names. Now it's time for you to make maybe 25 cents off of this. So what do you guys think would happen if all of a sudden Every scholarship athletes across the Power Five just said, you know what, the hell with this. We're standing up until something is done. Mr. Williams.
Yeah. Well, that's one option. I thought you were going to say what would happen if they go to the HBCUs and instead of
Oh, I know what would
Alabama.
happen there, but that's another story.
Right.
But
And I think that Lavelle Moulton's statement was not meant to be absent of all of the ramifications of what it meant, which is that you can come to North Carolina Central, play Division I basketball, and you can be a blue chip recruit and come to North Carolina Central, and that millions and millions and millions of dollars that are going to those Power 5 schools
would then
come to North Carolina Central, or can come to Howard University, or can come to Southern, or
Jackson
or Texas
State,
Southern, or Prairie View, and yeah, exactly. And that
like
would
it used to
change
be.
the dynamic. Yeah, it used to be that those athletes went to those schools, but there wasn't that kind of money for those for bowl games and NCAA tournaments at that time. So the upshot of what Lavelle Moulton is saying is not lost on me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that parents and others will realize, well, wait a minute, why am I continuing to contribute to my own oppression, to my own torture or humiliation or whatever, while by going to these other institutions and making, hundreds of millions of dollars in TV money and whatnot.
That's right.
So I'm glad that Lavelle said that, that Coach Moulton said that, and I'm glad, and I know that it will mean something to parents. And when parents recognize that we have 20 plus HBCUs that are Division I,
that's right.
Some HBCUs that may be contemplating, and if they had the kind of athletes that they had 50 years ago, I've just finished a series of 4 stories, Mike,
mm-hmm.
on the history of HBCU players in the NFL draft. And the first player drafted in the NFL draft from an HBCU was in 1950, a guy named Bob Stonewall Jackson out of North Carolina A&T.
Yes, I remember him. Yes.
But here's the point. In 1968, when the NFL and the AFL merged,
yes,
there were 70 black college players that were drafted in the 1968 draft alone. 70. Okay? In the 2000s, between 2000 and 2020, this year, there's been a total of 74 over those 20 years. Okay? So during that decade between 1968 to 1967, I think it was, not to 1968 to 76, there was an average of 55 black college players drafted each year. Now, you know what has happened to them is that they are no longer, the white colleges realize, we'll integrate because we got to have them.
That's right.
And we're not going to be able to compete. They will be able to beat us. So the fix was in, so to speak.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just and let me tell you, Mike, Eric Moore is listening on my phone. He's been trying to get in. He's not been able to get his link to work.
Okay.
I don't know if you can resend the link to him if possible. I sent him the link that Kenyatta sent me, but he's still not be able to get in. But you might be able to hear him through the phone if you want to include him in the conversation. Eric, can you speak?
Yeah, I can speak.
Okay,
can you
yes.
hear him, Mike?
Yes, I can.
I have tried multiple devices, and whenever I click on the link, I go directly to the JC Connect website, but there's no way to connect to Zoom. So,
well, I tell you what.
I'm here enjoying the conversation.
Well, Mr. Moore, I want to hear your comment on this, but I want to hear Dr. Cavil real quick because I know he has a hard out in about the next 5 minutes. And then, Mr. Moore, please stay on the line because I want to hear your comments. But Dr. Cavil, can you go ahead and give me your comments in regards to the question that I placed out there?
Certainly. First, let me welcome Luke Williams and Eric Moore, as you certainly did, Mr. Michael Jefferson, in regards to 2 of my brothers in the field.
Yes, sir.
That have done a lot of work to actually
promote black college
doing
sports.
the research and on the books. put me in a position to do some of the journalistic things that I've done. So I want to personally take this opportunity to thank my brothers, and I know that I'm leaving you in good hands when I move out and let these brothers move on and take over and provide you a framework that certainly that they will carry on well.
Yes, sir.
But to
Thank
kind
you.
of adjudicate what Luke Williams brought to the table in terms of Coach Moulton at North Carolina Central University, as what he brought in the table, I also want to bring out the fact that Willie Simmons at Florida A&M University on the football side at the FCS had similar comments. He put them on Facebook as well as Twitter, and so it hasn't necessarily been picked up by ESPN or US Today, but he had similar comments, and in fact, he'll actually be on my show tomorrow. Those that want to catch it is from 6 to 7 p.m. if you let me do this plug.
No, please, because we have to
Dr.
promote
Bill's
each other.
Inside the HBCU. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Bill's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. As you all know, we do a show from 6 to 7 every Tuesday on Facebook Live. You can catch us on Spreaker as a podcast if you want to hear it as well. He'll be on the show to talk a little more about his framing of that discussion in a lot of ways, as Luke alluded to, was talking about the disposition. I'm glad that the coaches are speaking up. To be frank with you, in my research, I've talked about this. I've written about it in a journal article I did back in 2014 in the Journal of Issues of Intercollegiate Athletics, the state of intercollegiate athletics at historical black colleges and universities, past, present, and persistent. It was a paper co-authored by Joseph N. Cooper, who then was at the University of Connecticut. He's now at the University of Boston. University of UMass in Boston. And Jeremy Cheeks, and both of those fellows are also doctors. So Dr. Joseph Cooper and Dr. Jeremy Cheeks, who at the time was a doctoral student at Texas A&M University. Now he's a professor at Alabama A&M University. We co-authored a paper that talked about the tenets and what it would look like with HBCUs succeeding from the NCAA, and a part of that was talking about HBCU athletes looking at other options in regards to removing themselves for what we now talk about the Power 5 institutions and
Right.
HBCUs for the financial gain. And in this article, we talk about historical lenses of how they took place and why it took place. Because of the sake of time, I'll move forward. But I also wanted to bring up one other lens to ground this of what we're talking about in a very academic way for those that have that type of interest, to let you know that these brothers that we're talking about are very well versed in regards to in this component. There is a research term out there called critical race theory, CRT.
Okay.
And we look at this in terms of from the legal spirit, but we also have lately looked at it in medical and other educational components as well as athletics. And there's a tenet in there, one which is whiteness as a property norm, which is some of the context I was talking about earlier, that we need to be very careful about how we frame our discussions, or we will be in the natural habit of looking at things in this property norm of whiteness as if whiteness is right or if it's the only thing that is right.
That's right.
The third one that is more succinct with this conversation that Luke talked about, and I'm sure Eric Moore will provide more context, is the fact of this tenet called interest convergence, which talks about specifically, this tenet acknowledges white people as being the quote-unquote primary beneficiaries of civil rights legislation, which exemplified in affirmative action in diversity and initiatives, and what we now find out in athletics, where it wasn't until black bodies in the commodity sense, which is a dangerous way that we look at it, but we have to understand in this capitalistic society that it is the norm and what ways that many people frame it. And it wasn't until this time where you see these segregated schools, and it started before that in the North with the private institutions that opened the door, but a lot of the reason they did it was not just in terms of them seeing that this was the right thing to do, although that was part of it. A lot of it was because of the interest, the financial interest what they were finding about these bowls that were starting out and their ability to win is they
Yes.
diversified their field, which meant bringing in these black athletes, these black bodies, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when
Mm-hmm.
that took place, you saw it moving from the East Coast um, with our famous brothers that had played at Rutgers, um, that was ostracized in terms of his feelings. I apologize, and I can't believe his name is escaping me now, but I'm sure as I continue, I'll get it. But then it went on to the Midwest. And then from the Midwest, it went into the West Coast. And it
Yes.
went from private institutions that didn't have these rules to public institutions. And went to just being able to have one on the basketball court to multiple on the basketball court. Just one or two on the football field to multiple players on the football field. And then finally in the South and the Southwest, with the Southwest coming on board. And then the last beacon was in the South, which now we see is the pillar of athletics in some of the stronger conferences that in a lot of ways have attained this strength in terms of the ability to win and therefore the ability to be recognized on TV where they get these significant contracts, which is ultimately what we're talking about is where these athletes at the best level are playing in terms of non-professional, and we're not even getting into the conversation that they're not being remunerated for this service outside of scholarships, what we know is not equal to the value of their talent.
Exactly.
Now we're starting to see in the names, image, and likeness cases, as well as the ability to at least pay for more than just the books. And now we're talking about the cost of living, but even pushing it further than that. So as we frame this discussion, I think that is one important way to look at it in regards to that framework. And again, as I start to tune off, again, welcome Luke Williams, and there will be more than capable to hold this conversation and provide a different framing of this discussion. And I'm so glad that you're having Michael Jefferson. And I apologize for needing to have this hard stop to get to this other meeting. But before I close on my part, I would again like to provide my condolences and my sincere
Mm-hmm.
thoughts to the George Floyd family, and in this area that is extended to his friends, those that were connected with Texas Southern specific high school at Jackie Yates High School, which was a segregated high school for black students at that
Mm. Well, I tell you what.
time.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Integration that I like to end. And to a lot of folks that knew him and that should not have lost his life in the way that we've seen. So with that, as I hold the ties between the African American call the HBCU diaspora or cultural identity, it's important that we do connections between the African American diaspora in general Africa HBCUs because they've been in since the very beginning in
Mm-hmm.
so many different ways. So there's no reason conversation of sports and connecting it to HBCUs and the greater people of African Americans in this country that we often American or blacks, whichever. So with that framing, I thank you for this opportunity. I thank the opportunity to join this conversation with my brother Luke Williams, my brother Eric Moore. And so when the next time we have a chance to talk, I'll be more than welcome to come back. But at this time,
Well, I tell you what. Well, Dr. Cavill, thank you very much for being able to join the conversation more than anything else. And I have.
Yeah, Michael, I'm still here, but I do have to, unfortunately, I have to leave also. I was having a little trouble.
You're having a little trouble also. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Cavill and Mr. Williams, thank you guys very much for being able to join me on the line. And right now, since the two of you have to leave. Thank you guys. Thank you very, very much for the time that you actually spent on the line, and especially giving the wealth of information and the wealth of knowledge that you imparted during this conversation. And gentlemen, thank you. And I tell you what, now I have Mr. Eric Moore on the line. So, gentlemen,
Thank you.
this conversation will take place again next week, and this will be a weekly conversation. Not just what's going on with that took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but just the conversation of HBCU sports. So this will be a weekly conversation at 2 o'clock every week, and if the time changes, then it will go out. But gentlemen, thank you very much for your contribution for this week, and I look forward to continuing this conversation on a weekly basis.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys very much. And now I have on the call, I have Mr. Eric Moore. And Mr. Moore, thank you very much for being able to join this conversation here, because, and I think we'll go ahead and get your thoughts. But before we move forward, we've had conversations before, but for those who are new to the audience, could you please let us know who you are and a little bit about the Honoring Group?
Well, let's see.
Where can you
Where
start?
shall I begin? It all began about, Luke said 26 years, so he and I have known each other for the past 25 years
Yes, sir.
when he first began the Black College Sports page. I have grown up on a HBCU campus, North Carolina Central University, which is where my father was dean of the School of Library Science. That was my introduction to HBCU life. But of course, as far as I was concerned, that was life. It just happened to be HBCU.
Yes.
But having brought up in that environment and all of the relationships that one can develop in those environments, I've always had an interest in HBCU.
Okay.
And my background is primarily in communication. I was one of the early Negroid persons to attend North Carolina State University. There are a lot of people who say, oh, yeah, he's an HBCU guy. Well, I knew a lot about HBCUs, but I admit that my undergrad work was at North Carolina State University. And I like to tell people, I went to an all-black high school, Hillside High School in Durham, North Carolina. And my freshman year at NC State was basically nothing but a review of my senior year at Hillside.
Mm.
And so when I began to realize, I got prepared pretty well by some very good teachers,
Yes.
then I did not have a problem feeling a level of confidence that comes with being in certain environments.
Yes, sir.
When I was teaching in Ohio University, I used to tell many of the black students there that I grew up in an environment, and Durham is kind of special. There have been books written about Durham and how it operated, how it functioned. And my father was a member of the school board, and I'll always remember him carrying me out with the lines that distinguish between the different attendance zones for the elementary, junior high, and high schools in Durham, North Carolina. And I could see the lines going down people's backyards, which made it possible for certain folks to keep going to certain schools. And that was probably my introduction to gerrymandering and how it can impact the choice that one does or does not have. Anyway, I majored in communications at NC State, and always wanted to get involved from a standpoint of operating radio and television stations. In fact, one of my college classmates went to work for the local TV station, and I went to work for the local radio station, and we then developed our careers from there. Fast forward, after spending some time in the Air Force, I came back to Fayetteville State University and was hired as Director of Communications at FSU. And during the time that I was there, helped develop what was known as the Bronco Sports Network. The school had a campus radio station, 100,000 watt. And when I got there on campus and began to realize, this is a vehicle to communicate with a very large service area,
Mm-hmm.
I immediately saw it as a marketing tool for the university. And fortunately, others began to see it the same way. But at the same time, I started looking at other work. When that college classmate went to work for Black Entertainment Television, so I'm at the CIAA
BET.
tournament. He's at the CIAA tournament. He's working for BET.
Yeah.
I'm there working for Fayetteville State.
Yes.
So while we were having lunch and talking, he says, you're a stats guy. I said, yeah, that's my forte. As I get involved in statisticals, now it's called analytics. But the bottom
That's right.
line is we keep track of what people do
That's
so
right.
that they can have some comparisons. Anyway, he asked me if I would be willing to sit in and do stats
Uh-huh.
for the BET broadcast of the CIAA tournament. I said, sure. And it was really a test to see if I could do the job, and at the same time gave him a chance to pitch his bosses about an additional person added to the crew.
Mm.
So I actually got to be part of the travel crew for Black Entertainment Television as a result of my performance at the CIAA tournament. That's where I first met Charlie Neal. We've been very good friends ever since. I've done some work with ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some work with, it was Major Broadcasting, NBC as it was known then.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I've been basically following HBCUs for quite a while, and I came to understand the magnitude of HBCUs while working for BET.
Yes.
And I always
Yes.
tell people one of the biggest, most successfully marketed football games in America was Jackson State versus Southern University, where you have
Yes.
66,000 people
Yes.
in Veterans Memorial Stadium in Jackson, Mississippi, and there were no fights
That's
because
right.
there was an assumption, of course, that if too many of my folk got together, somebody would be fighting somebody.
That's
And
correct.
that's when I began to realize, ooh. And so then it came to me, do these people even get information about their schools? So I began to start the Honor Dan Online. Honor Dan basically is named after my mother and father. I
Mm.
figured you couldn't lose if you honored your mother and father
That's
with the
right.
name of your company.
That's right.
So that's how I got involved with HBCU sports. And then thanks to a guy named Ed Hill, who was the sports information director at Howard University,
Okay.
he got to Luke and told Luke, y'all get in touch with this guy, Eric Moore. So we started working together, and I would help get stories together for him to write, or I would write some stories myself. And so that's how we have been for the past 25 years working in HBCU sports.
Well, I tell you what, thank you very much because as you alluded to, we've been knowing each other since the turn of the century. That makes it sound like we're really old. But since 1999, and through my uncle Sam Jefferson, who
Yes.
was the sports information director at Jackson State University. That's how we've been knowing each other for well over 20 years.
Yeah,
And,
that's true.
and and for that relationship, thank you very much. And again, thank you for being a part of the show. The question as you were coming on that I had posed to Dr. Cavill and Mr. Williams, I'll pose to you, is what do you think would happen if all of the athletes, the African American athletes in the Power Five schools, would decide to say, you know what, enough's enough. And until change occurs in sports and how we're treated in terms of where the funding is going, we're not playing. Now you have some entities that are out there that are saying a scholarship is enough. You should be satisfied. But yet and still, you have the coaches that are making millions each year off of the backs of the African American athletes. Shoe contracts, commercials, above and beyond the contracts that they sign with the university. So, what do you think? What's your opinion on what would happen, or do you even think that would even be a possibility of something like that occurring?
Well, I hate to throw water on what is an excellent idea, but there are a couple of factors
Hmm.
that make me think it'll never happen.
Understand?
Part of those factors relate to, in many instances, parents or entourages surrounding the athlete.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of the biggest issues that a lot of athletes run into, and it starts in junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
is that once they are recognized as having some skills, then there are folks that want to direct them to
Two.
a certain coach, to a certain school. There's been some investigations going on now with the FBI and the NCAA schools, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the NCAA organization. And quite frankly, when I look, and I've had a chance to work Atlantic Coast Conference men's and women's basketball tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of just look around and you begin to see folks that look like me
Mm-hmm.
sitting in the stands
Mm-hmm.
and enjoying all of the benefits that come.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as their student athlete finishes his eligibility, all of a sudden they're forgotten about.
Exactly.
So the good life that comes with being in a Power 5 operation is a kind of drug, for lack of a better phrase, that a lot of parents just can't get away from.
Yes.
And it starts with AAU basketball, and I don't know how many. I think in the theater it's called the Stage Mothers,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll now have mothers and fathers of skilled athletes,
Yes.
basically because of the perception that his ice is colder than ours.
Yes.
The assumption is
Yes.
if you come to the Power 5 school or a big major Division 1 school, you will get exposure.
Yes.
Well, the bottom line is if you're good, they'll find you.
Exactly.
But nobody wants to take that chance. So I don't think it's going to happen because there are too many outside influences on the athlete. The athlete may decide, and in a couple of instances, there have been athletes who flat out said, okay, it's my decision. In one case, a young man said, I'm only going to an HBCU. And he was a 5-star recruit.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of him making that statement, then the other coaches knew, okay, well, he's lost. But there are others, and I remember a guy named Bobby Dandridge, who
Mm-hmm.
used to coach at Norfolk State University,
Yes.
would
Yes.
intentionally go after the 4 or 5-star recruits, bringing them into Hampton. Bringing them into
To
Norfolk
Norfolk State. Yeah.
because he believed that they had just as much to offer. It was a little different, but it was something that the student could enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always this familiar in terms of family atmosphere that you might not necessarily find at the
If
big
he had gone to a
PWIs, as we
power, yeah,
call them,
that's right.
predominantly white institutions. So while it would be nice
Mm-hmm.
to see that happen, I remember somebody was saying, wouldn't it have been nice if the Fab Five had not gone to Michigan and perhaps had gone to another HBCU, or gone to an HBCU?
Yeah.
What would have happened?
As
So
a matter of fact,
I guess I would rather not even address the possibilities because I personally don't think it's going to happen.
well, as a matter of fact, when you were discussing it, I was going to pose that question to you, the possibility of not just the Fab Five, but let's just say, for instance, 2020 has already been taken care of in terms of of the recruits. They've already committed. They're already preparing to practice for the upcoming season. But for 2021, uh, even though you may have some recruits that have committed during their junior year, but you have a lot of individuals that uncommit and go elsewhere. For 2021, it's still possible that some of those athletes could be swayed to go elsewhere. And with that, let's just say even though A&T and Hampton, no, I'm sorry, North Carolina A&T and Hampton University have decided to move away from the MEAC and they have moved on to the Big South Conference. But yet and still, if you have someone that decides to, let's say, go to a Howard University or Florida A&M, and of course the Jackson State Southern or Prairie View, or one of the more recognized names because of Coach Eddie Robinson, Grambling State University, decided to go to any one of those larger institutions, what do you think the landscape would be over the next 4 years?
Well, it could be very interesting, as they say, and there may be another way of looking at this. You
Mm-hmm.
may not get a mass influx of top recruits into an HBCU,
Mm-hmm.
but you may find especially on the transfer route,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of these kids will get enticed to come to a particular school
Mm-hmm.
and end up sitting on the bench for 2 or 3 years, and they want to play.
That's right.
So if they have an opportunity where they can play, be it at HBCU or someplace else,
Mm-hmm.
and with uh, media capabilities that now are coming to many of the HBCUs. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
MEAC and the SWAC have ESPN contracts for both football. There was a HBCU day on ESPNU,
Mm-hmm.
and they were running championship games for volleyball, men's basketball,
Mm-hmm.
and then football during the Labor Day. I'm sorry, the Memorial Day weekend.
Yes.
So there is that possibility. I won't say never,
Right.
but it'll be tough to convince many of these top recruits that they could be, if they still want to go to the league, and unfortunately a lot of them come to college with the express purpose of going to the league.
Mm-hmm.
And then as many of the top athletes do go to the professional level without finishing school,
Mm-hmm.
then they may or may not come back to finish to get their degree
Right.
because they're so focused on
On.
going pro that they don't realize what happens if you get injured, what happens if you're getting old, and
Mm-hmm.
other types of
Yes.
impediments to you being at your best. What do you have to fall back on?
That's
I
right.
don't know how much that gets taught. The whole APR thing that you were talking about earlier
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is designed to get student athletes to start working toward a degree. And yes, there have been some HBCUs that haven't had the kind of success we would like, but a lot of it has to do with resources.
Yes.
In
Yes.
many instances, a student at a Power Five school, for instance, can come to summer school, have all of his fees paid for, and then that can help him move towards getting the right courses in line so that he can then work toward a degree. He
Yeah.
may or
Yeah.
may not finish the degree because while some may leave early, early can be defined as freshman year, sophomore year,
Right.
junior year, and then possibly senior year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not having the impediment or not having someone perhaps stand on your back, making sure you go to class and do those kinds of things
Right.
when you're at one school may be what you needed in terms of getting that little push going to another.
That's
And there
right.
are a lot of
That's
success
right.
stories from HBCU students who are not necessarily student athletes who have had some semblance of success out in the working world based upon the foundation that they got at the HBCU.
Yes.
So while it would be nice that they make that mass exodus and then realize the kind of power that they have, um, I'm not going to say it'll never happen, but I'm not very, very positive about it taking place.
No, and I do understand exactly what you're saying in terms of these athletes not being able or to be in a position to um, or may not be persuaded to go to an HBCU, but and like you said, there are some locations. Let's just say, look at some of the latter individuals that were mentioned, McNair, Air McNair. I
Yeah,
happened to watch both of them at Jackson State when they came into Mississippi Memorial Stadium, and they decided they were able to play against Jackson State, and the crowds were 50, 40, 50, 60,000 uh, 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 individuals that had a
yeah,
chance to watch those games. And so when you say, well, we don't have the crowds, but just like you said, certain locations that you go to, you would be able to draw that type of attendance. Jackson State is one that comes to mind. They play in one of, if not the largest stadium as far as HBCU goes. Please correct me if I'm wrong in regards to
yeah.
that.
Now, yeah, I would be willing to say that in most cases, as far as a home field,
Hmm.
Jackson State's playing in Mississippi Memorial Stadium um, as a home field.
Hmm.
They easily seat 62, 63,000. Most of the other well-attended games are usually classic games.
Yes.
And so as a result of that, yes, they may have big numbers, but I think Jackson State may be one of the schools that has been at the top of the NCAA attendance ledger for many, many years. Because
Yes.
I know the SWAC has, in many instances, won, although it's not really a trophy, but they've had the best attended
Out of
average
all,
attendance
yes.
for I think 16 in the last 17 years. So
Because I know Prairie View, they just built a new stadium, and I believe it holds just under 20,000,
okay,
but it can
okay,
be expanded to above 20, close to 30,000, if I'm not
okay,
mistaken. Grambling, of course, when they built their stadium, I had the privilege of marching in that stadium in 1984. I
mm-hmm.
believe that was in 1984 when they built that built their new stadium, um, and I believe it holds just over 30, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Southern University holds roughly about 26 or either 36,000. So yes. So these are things that we have to look at, and then I believe it was yourself or either Mr. Williams that mentioned Air McNair,
yes,
number two, McNair the second,
right,
when he played with Alcorn, and also when you look at Jerry Rice when he played at Mississippi Valley.
yes,
Neither one of those guys, and correct me since you've been in this business a lot longer than I have, neither one of those guys, when they were in high school, they were not 4 or 5 star recruits. Am I correct?
yes. That's true because in most instances back then the recruiting system wasn't as sophisticated as it is now.
Hmm.
And there were, I know in Steve McNair's case, he was determined to play quarterback.
Yes.
And all of the people recruiting him kept saying, yes, you make a great defensive back or linebacker. He said, no, I want to play quarterback. And so the fact that he was adamant about playing quarterback eliminated a lot of schools that were trying to take his athletic ability and put it in some other position on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
field.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yes, the Alcorn, Steve McNair
Hmm.
saga, basically, in terms of, all right, if I can't play quarterback, I'm not coming to your school.
Right.
And then, of course, the Mississippi Valley. And another fact I thought about as you were talking about attracting athletes.
Yes.
Many of today's athletes are rather urban based. And if you've been to Ithabena, Mississippi, or you have taken the trip down to Alcorn State, Mississippi,
Yes, I
it's
have.
not your booming metropolis. And so
Yep.
some of these athletes don't see the advantage of being away from distractions and other things that can happen in a bigger city.
Yes.
And yet, Alcorn has a beautiful stadium, beautiful facility.
Beautiful
When
campus.
the folk pile in on that one road in versus one road out,
Yes.
uh, it can be a little dicey, trying to get where you want to go. But then I remember I was working a SIAC spring championship in Birmingham. The game was actually going to be played in Tuscaloosa,
Mm.
but it was so crowded because Alabama was playing its spring game, and they only drew
Wow.
90,000 people to the spring
To
game
their
as the
spring
University of
game.
Alabama. I'm headed to,
Wow.
because we actually played over at Stillman College. I'm headed to Stillman College. I'm going down the interstate, and I'm looking at all of these cars parked on the side. There were people who had parked on the interstate so that they could have a place to park while they walked into Tuscaloosa.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Unbelievable. And see, this is one of the other things that we also have to compete against when we do when we do play sports,
Yes.
is that attendance. Now,
Yep.
Jackson State has historically, as you just mentioned, as you just alluded to, historically, our fans support and they will follow Jackson State University wherever they go. One of the
Very
things
true.
I'm privy to is that when Jackson State had the opportunity to play UNLV, the very day the announcement was made, I had a chance to talk to alums, and they were making reservations that day. One
Mm-hmm.
individual, he was on dialysis. The next day, the announcement was made. he had his dialysis treatment moved to Las Vegas.
Wow.
And so that's what HBCU sports is
Yes.
that you follow your teams. And the same as you have with the Alabamas, the LSUs, the USCs, the Michigan, Ohio States. We will travel. We will follow our teams. Unfortunately, just like some of the other PWIs, you have other colleges and universities that their fan base may not support their teams as well as others.
True.
But as I said historically, the Jackson States of the world, the Southerns of the world, Alcorn, we will follow. They will travel wherever to support. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of recruits look at. Yes, the location plays a major role in them going because going to an Itabena, Mississippi, yes, very small. Going to an Alcorn, one way in, one way out of that location. But for each school, the campus is beautiful. Southern University, they play in the capital city
Yep.
of Louisiana. Jackson State,
Baton Rouge. Yeah.
that's yes sir. Jackson State, the same. Prairie View,
Mm-hmm.
Texas Southern. Even though Houston is not the state capital, it is the fourth largest city in the country, in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are some of the advantages that we have in playing in certain locations in certain cities. The schools that are located in Atlanta, Clark Atlanta, um, and gosh, the other school escapes me. Morehouse,
Morehouse. Yeah.
that's in Atlanta. Uh, you have these advantages. So we have locations that can attract students to actually get them to go to HBCU colleges and universities. And I think this is something that we really need to implore this term is no longer being used, but the SIDs and the athletic directors of these colleges and universities that we should really promote the advantages of what we have instead of all of having the students to look at the disadvantages. And
Yeah.
if we
Good
can
point.
and if we can promote the advantages of what we have for each of our schools and really promote that, I think we would. And even though the Bible talks about not looking back but moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
but if we actually took advantage of that to show what the benefits are of going to an HBCU, I believe we could go back to our glory days to have more more African Americans
Yeah.
that are very very successful in sports coming back to our colleges and universities and not only being successful in sports but also being successful on the academic side
Yes.
because as you know and I'm quite sure you have the statistics to prove it. But I know at the Jackson States of the world, Alcorn and also some of the others, Kentucky State and Central State, you have our Caucasian brothers and sisters are starting to attend those universities.
Yep.
Tennessee State also comes to mind. Hampton comes to mind. Florida A&M. I work with a young lady that works at Florida that went to school at Florida A&M, and they went there because the university tuition was much less expensive,
Mm-hmm.
but they received the same education.
And they find themselves not necessarily unwelcomed. Most people, I mean, the assumption is, oh, I'm going to that black school and I'm white, so I'm going to have to watch out for myself. In many instances, that's not an issue.
That's right.
White students are welcomed, will be a part of the extracurricular activities, and are actively included if they want to
That's right.
in activities involving students. So they begin to see that okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was. Plus, I've always said, it gives white students a perspective of being a minority. So if you've ever been a minority on an HBCU campus, then you're a little more sensitive to what life is like being a minority outside of an HBCU campus,
Yes, that
because
is
in most cases the world out there um, is going to be populated so that the minority person at an HBCU can enjoy the benefits of having more and more people look like them and more opportunities to do things that they might not ever have gotten a chance to do at a PWI.
that is so true. That is so true. Well, I tell you what, Mr. Moore, thank you very much. But is there anything else that you would like to impart upon us for this week's show? Because I pray that you're able to continue to join us on a weekly basis. And if you're not able to join us each week, then hopefully, and the show will take place every Monday at 2 p.m.
Okay,
And for those Mondays that you're available, please, please, please join us on the show. But
I'd be more than happy to do that.
yes, sir.
Uh, and I would like to say, only because there's a small fraternity of people. In fact, when we talk about Kenyatta and Lute
Yes,
and
sir.
me and Charlie Neal and even your Uncle Sam,
Yes, sir.
uh, many of us know each other from, of course, working the circuit covering HBCUs.
Yes, sir.
And I just got word that a gentleman who, depending upon how old you are,
Mhm.
is immediately identified with Grambling Sports Highlights. His name is Ron Pinckney.
Name
And he
sounds
also
familiar.
worked in New York for ABC, I think, and CBS Radio,
Yes, sir.
and had been most recently working as the play-by-play voice for Hampton University's radio station.
Oh.
And unfortunately, he passed away over the weekend. Uh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and we've lost another jewel because
Mm.
he was uh, one who was willing to put in all of the professional work necessary to make his broadcast just as good as the big time networks out of New York. So condolences to him and his family. Uh, and well, I haven't gotten any words or any details about when services may be held, but I did want to get that in since there may be some folk out there who have heard of Grambling Sports Highlights, Ron Pinckney. He worked with Mutual Black Network and
Yes.
Sheridan Broadcasting. So I just wanted to put that little plug in for him and send some prayers up for Mr. Pinckney.
I agree, and thank you very much for sharing that. And because we don't have as many HBCU networks or uh, um, productions out there anymore, that's why we came out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that we were able to provide that type of service. With the show we're doing today, bringing individuals on so they can speak, and also later on we'll be talking directly to the commissioners of the conferences later on during the year, the MEAC, SWAC, CIAA, and the SIAC. We will be speaking with the commissioners or the SIDs of different schools. And these are some of the things that we will be doing. But in conjunction to that, the goal is to be able to go in, show some of the games, whether it's football, basketball, volleyball, track and field, baseball. It doesn't matter the sport. The goal is that at yourstreet.tv that we will be a vehicle for HBCU schools to funnel their sports through. We understand that there is another entity out there today that is currently being used, but as we just talked about, uh, a lot of HBCU schools and African American athletes are being utilized and disenfranchised in terms of where the funds are going. And this is something that we want to change the dynamic of. The quality is as the same, just as our education is the same. And we want to make sure that we bring quality sports, quality entertainment, quality interviews to people that are watching. And Mr. Moore, I thank you for everything that you have brought to sports, to HBCU sports. But we will continue this dialogue next week at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're here on Block Sports on yourstreet.tv, and this is being seen on our, when I say our, I mean yourstreet.tv's own platform for the very first time. And we want to make sure that we push this because this is our platform, not on anyone else's, but this is ours. And we want to make sure that for those who are watching, you can be on here promoting your own kind. I hate to say it like that, but we need to make sure that we support our own. And if we don't support our own, then we could be lost. But we have to make sure that we continue to support others that support us. Because it's not just one. Because when we die, when we go to heaven, we're going to see blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, uh, Russians, you name it, they will be there. So don't just feel that it's one against everyone. We have to support each other. And with that, Mr. Moore, any closing thoughts?
No, no, you pretty much put it all together. I'm glad to have had the conversation because you've got a unique group of people who probably don't interact like we have today.
Yes, sir.
And often we're doing it in the press box for some classic game or championship game. So
Yes, sir.
it's a good mix.
Well, I tell you what. Well, Mr. Moore, thank you again. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you next week and on throughout football season. I hope to be able to have other individuals, as I said, um, from across HBCU, the kingdom, and we're going to move forward from there. So until next week, everyone continue to stay safe, continue with your social distancing, and everyone just be aware of your surroundings and what's going on. So everyone, love you, much peace, and may God bless each and every one of you. So have another blessed day and continue on with life.
Sounds good.